last year, we had a number of delegates who asked if we could have some of our clients actually talk about their experiences about implementing their GRC journey. So this year and today, we're really happy to have one of my clients, Nationwide Building Society. I'm joined with Sarah, who's the GRC tooling executive, and Simon Cory, who's the Director of Risk Strategy at Nationwide Building Society. So both have been instrumental in their journey along for the last year, looking at the business case, looking at toolings, looking at technology, some of the lessons learned, how to really get the most out of these type of technologies and implementations and make them a success. So Sarah and Simon are going to be touching on all those aspects.
We'll just introduce ourselves quickly, and then we'll go into the material. So I'm Simon Cory, Director of Risk Strategies, as Harry says. I have three main accountabilities. One is risk system, which is Sarah as well, which we'll talk about in a second. Two is Nationwide's risk framework. So the team reports into me on the risk framework side. And the third responsibility I have is Office of the CRO, effectively. Support for the CRO around strategy setting, financial management, project delivery, those sorts of things into risk community at Nationwide. So I've been at Nationwide for around 20 years, in first line and second line risk, more recently. I've also worked in finance, so I'm an accountant, and before that I worked elsewhere in risk.
The reason I asked that is because I've been at Nationwide 20 years as well. 10 years predominantly in operations, financial crime, AML, and the last 10 years, various risk management roles across Nationwide, predominantly actually in the first line, but more recently in the second line, where we're delivering the tool, but we'll cover that in a bit more detail as we go through the presentation.
So, why was metric stream needed? We've only got 3 slides to present to you this afternoon, so we're not going to do lots of kind of death by PowerPoint, that's right. And we do want to have time for questions at the end, so please do store up your questions. If possible, what we'll do is we'll just kind of talk to the material, and then we'll get to that point and have time for questions. If no one's got any questions, then we can all finish off early and go and have a cup of tea or something. The very first slide is all around kind of the context. Why are we implementing a new GRC tool in Nationwide effectively? So we had or we still have live today, a legacy system which was implemented 5 years ago. That's what we put on the slide there as an ineffective GRC tool. Effectively, that tool there does not allow us to manage risks in the way we want them to do in the organisation. We have a siloed control environment. So Nationwide is very well controlled. We have a whole set of different accountable executives across Nationwide who really understand their control estate in splendid isolation. What we haven't been able to do is to bring that together into one central system before. Our old tool wouldn't allow us to do it. We wanted to do that with a new tool, which is part of our problem statement then. And each of those individual controls are maintained on separate risk systems, control systems in those different areas. There are also different systems for logging incidents, and so there's a disparate system estate. So we found ourselves in a situation where kind of there was not an optimal design for our GRC tool estate in the organisation. So that was around the problem statement. We chose to go with metric stream, which is helping us, and we're 3 months away from go live today. We've been through a very long journey to get to where we are, and we've got some fantastic lessons to share with you in a second. Why did we choose to go with metric stream? Because the solution will be hosted on the cloud, which gives us more flexibility, and our old system is maintained in-house and is heavily customized, and it's very difficult to change as a result. We wanted to go with metric stream because of the controls monitoring functionality that the system offers. Effectively, the data model is structured in a certain way within metric stream that allows you to look at the performance of controls relative to your risks, but also the way we're doing it across the processes that the organisation runs, and also suppliers and so on. We also then were interested in metric stream because of the multi-app platform. We're implementing operational risk and compliance apps initially. We do want to expand out the use of metric stream across other potential use cases, e.g. audit, third party, BCM. They are future phases for us. but that the system would allow us that opportunity to expand out across not just the core operational risk and compliance functionality which we're implementing today. And the flexible data model was important for us because that allowed us to effectively work with our framework team that also reports into me to have a system that kind of will work for nationwide. It's out of the box, and I'm stealing some of your lines now, Sarah, sorry. Out of the box, and we've chosen to configure it, but in a way that works with our framework and with the way that Nationwide runs. So kind of the data model is flexible enough for us as an organisation.
Thank you. Before I start, actually, I picked Simon up for not saying how long he'd worked at Nationwide, but I didn't say what I actually did, I've just remembered. So I look after the GRC tooling team, which is wholly and fundamentally implementing metric stream. So I'm leading the implementation of metric stream. I've got a team of 8. I'll touch on, as we go through, why that's so important, but I've got that. I also look after regulatory reporting and fraud systems. So I've got 3 teams in total, but the GRC team that we'll talk about today is what's implementing metric stream, which is why I'm here. So I thought I'd better mention that. So these 2 things on the slide here, business engagement and strong team, fundamentally are why this project is a success. They are absolutely vital to everything that we've achieved so far, and they are so important. And everybody said that to us before we started our journey, but actually I don't think that we understood that totally until we started going through that journey. The business engagement element started way before we even got funding. So I went on a shameless selling campaign to everyone who actually would be signing and sitting around the board and deciding whether we got funding, telling them individually what this tool would mean for them across all 3 lines of defence. Although importantly, the tool is predominantly for the first line. What the second and third line will get out of it is reporting, and they'll be able to view, but it's a risk management tool for the first line. We've always stayed true to that, and Simon and I are trusted on that basis because that's our background and that's where we come from. I wanted to talk, this might seem a bit specific, but I wanted to talk specifically about the business validation workshops, and the reason being is what this touches on is we didn't have requirements. We did. Small requirements, obviously you need some requirements, but we wanted to move away from the, what's in your requirements? We need to be part of sign-off for requirements. Let's approve the requirements, because actually, this is an out-of-the-box industry standard tool. Those are the requirements. We weren't going to have massive business requirements gathering workshops, because actually we were quite lucky to learn from our first implementation that that was not the way to go, because we ended up with an absolute monster that bore no resemblance to actually what the tool was meant to do. It was just a nationwide tool. So what the business validation workshops were is after we designed the tool as a team, we took some senior people covering all the communities across nationwide, and we said it was validation, and we were very clear, this is not for you to give us requirements, this is just validating what we've done to check that it works. And we did that for a week, and it worked brilliantly. There was some challenge in there, and we've probably changed no more than 4 or 5 things. So it was totally worthwhile, but we're very, very clear that the design is done, it's based on the tool, and we're not changing it. So that was really, really important. More important is the facilitated risk and control assessment. So in Q&A, because I know Gaurav touched on it yesterday, if any of you heard that, we've got very defined new risk taxonomy and risk categorization that was very clear before we started this journey, so that the tool would just be an enabler. But as a result, we want to make sure that the data that goes in on day 1 is fit for purpose, does align to that taxonomy. So when people press the button and they look at it, they don't see a whole lot of mess where people aren't understanding what the new taxonomy is. So as a result, what we're doing is we're running from now up until February, when we hit the button to go live, facilitated risk and control self-assessments with the whole business. So those workshops consist of the community, along with the framework representative, tooling representative, execs that would sign off those risks, and their risk people. And they will literally, over a 2-day period, come up with their risk and control self-assessment, sign it off, job done, data's ready to go into the tool. That sounds very easy, and it's not, but it's absolutely vital in terms of the data we get into the tool. Now, I think this last bullet point is the most important, and this is our events that we run and our business champions and the use of them, and how we've sold this tool from day 1. We run quarterly events. They started way back in September last year. The one we held in May, we chose to do a 3-day workshop. No, actually, it was a 3-day event. It wasn't a workshop, a 3-day event in our innovation centre, which made it all very cool. And what we did is we ran a video that had popcorn, and it was a video showing how the tool was going to work. And then people would come out and then they'd get a demo of the tool, and then they could go over to Framework Corner and ask any framework questions, because inevitably when you're doing a system demo, people want to know framework, and these people are systems people, so we made sure we have framework there. And then we had Suggestion Corner, where people could write stuff that we made sure we go back with. And I'll be very clear, actually. They asked a lot of questions that I knew they would, that I knew they wouldn't like the answers to, but they got the answers because we've been very clear on scope. So the events have been key, and the last event we did was more of a stand-up, show and tell. This is what we're doing. Here's the timeline. Risk and controls come in. Make sure you've got training. Make sure all those things are happening. Now, business champions, this is not planned or designed, but hot off the press. We had our first Business Champions Forum this morning, so it wasn't great that we weren't there, but I've got someone back on the team who's leading business readiness, and he led the forum, which was 2.5 hours long. It was very cool. They had a Slido going on. They were told how important they are, told they'll get training first, told that they'll be the people in the business, and more importantly, they're going to get a lot of merchandise with a little Metric Stream logo on so they can feel really special. So that happened today, and we've had a video call with Doug, who's back in the office, and he said it went really well, so we were really, really pleased with that. Which leads me on, actually, nicely to a strong team. I think we're nationwide, but the trend certainly for nationwide, possibly not for anybody else, with this project is we held it completely in the business. So it's completely my team, everyone down to IT, business readiness, analysts that are working on the system, project management, all sits on my team, and they all line directly into me. Now, it doesn't mean we don't have to interface, obviously, because we're running an IT project. So, for example, I've got an IT readiness lead who's in the audience. I won't point him out because you won't like that, because he's IT, so he doesn't really like that stuff. So I'm not going to do that. But I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Don't do it. But his role is to own support model, own interaction with architectural review board, own the cloud governance board, own the service introduction, own everything to do, UAT, everything to do with making sure we are ready. But that sits as part of the project team, and he's part of all those projects. He knows the business. He knows what we're implementing. It isn't an IT standalone issue. But obviously, he has to sign that stuff off, but he's overall accountable for it. And then I have various roles like that. So business readiness lead, I have project management sitting on my team. And I think that has been really important. And predominantly, most of my team come from the first line as well. So people know them, they trust them, they know what we're doing, and they know the business model. And even more importantly than that, we are all on the journey together. We want this tool to succeed, and we will all do everything in our power to make it succeed. We sit and we workshop, and we make sure everything runs smoothly and is implemented. So that was my last point around transformation versus business team. I genuinely think, and actually from talking to a lot of people around here actually, that is what sets us aside from a lot of other projects, and that is why we're successful, is because we know what we're doing and we know the system. We're not doing it off the side of the desk. This is our jobs. This is our main job. So, yeah. So I think that covers that.
Yeah, and I don't think you can outsource that. I don't think you can easily ask IT to do your build for you or transformation to do your build for you. I don't think you can ask anyone else to do the training. So training also sits under me and another part of the team. We've taken that ownership and also ownership for the decision to go live with Metric Stream. Right. Metric Stream as a product, is owned by us. There will be tough times in anyone's project, and kind of you need to own that yourself and not sort of outsource it to anyone else, and therefore kind of when things go a bit sort of awry, start to sort of look at other people to try and solve these problems. We've got ownership for that in the team, and what Sarah says there about her team is genuinely true. I think Sarah, embarrassing her a little bit, is a great leader, and the team are really, really genuinely, really, really strong. And they work with other strong people in other parts of my team, around framework, around training and so on as well. So it's a really good team effort. So in terms of lessons learned, there's a few points we'll run through here. Business case, when we went for original funding in Nationwide and tried to go to a funding board to get them to give us some money to do the project, we were really clear that what we wanted to be accountable for in terms of delivery around benefits. It's quite tempting, I think, with a GRC solution to think, well, actually, if you implement this will lead to some efficiencies, could lead to some benefits, maybe different roles could be configured in a different way. we were really clear that we were doing this for organisational maturity, risk management maturity. That was the kind of the benefit of doing it. That would allow us as an organisation to demonstrate to the regulator we knew what we were doing and we could do our jobs really well. It would allow us also internally to have more insight around the performance of our controls, which would allow us to prioritise remediation, or maybe even identify some orphan controls that you could decommission. So being very, very clear on precisely what you want to be held accountable for, I think, is really important when you're constructing your business case. Because funding for GRC tools is it's not necessarily something that will lead to extra income, or it's not something that could kind of very tangibly lead to cost reduction. And so it's very difficult, really, I think, for everybody to get funding. But being really clear on precisely what the benefits are, I think, was really important. Another one of the points we've got on the slide here, which Sarah kind of alluded to a little bit earlier on, not designed by committee. So our previous system, we were in the first line at the time when that was implemented, and we were actually invited into a whole set of workshops to take our requirements for how the system could be configured. It was run out of second line. The implementation was run out of second line. Second line, I think, was very eager to please the first line, and so first line typically would come up with a whole set of different requests from all the different control owners and the different risk areas of Nationwide. And they would then try and satisfy those requests by building it into the system. So, for example, someone might ask to have a link to a GL code or something put into the system. All of these requests that kind of individually might sound sensible because someone somewhere is special and they feel they need to understand the linkage between the GRC tool and the general ledger code or something. That is not the core functionality of the GRC tool. And we've been really clear, having been through that process ourselves, actually we could learn from that really and ensure that we are the people really who are setting the structure of the system. We'll work through with the metric stream team exactly how the system should be configured, engage the first line, as Sarah described a second ago, almost so they feel absolutely involved. And if there are some things that, if we've got something fundamentally wrong, obviously we're going to respond. But to be really, really clear not to design the system by committee, because it would just become a horrible, customized system that cannot be upgraded, which is essentially the system we have today.
Which we can showcase to anyone who wants to see, because it is terrible.
You won't want to see it though.
No, you won't.
So that's the second point there, not designed by committee.
Okay, so that leads nicely on to no customization. Now, probably more than I should, and my team, I probably wind my team up more than anybody else on this. I am absolutely adamant that we will have zero customizations. And I stood on the stage last year and I said, we won't have any customizations. And a lot of people looked and said, maybe 4%, maybe 5%. And I said, no, zero. And that's been tough, actually, very tough, because obviously there's some stuff, and you look at it, and KPMG, who are building it for us, will look at us and say, well, that's a customization. And my team are looking at me as if to say, please. And I'm like, no, we're not. We're definitely not doing it. And that's because we're haunted by the system that we have customized, and therefore it can't be upgraded, so I don't even want one. And we have come really close. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was a situation where we thought we were definitely going to have to compromise, and it would have broken Nationwide's model in terms of loss events. So there was no way I could have stuck to it. But actually, we workshopped it for a good hour or two with KPMG and my team, and we worked out a way to use the system where we wouldn't have to customize it, and that was brilliant. And what I'd urge you to do, actually, is if MetricStream or whoever's doing your build says that's a customization, I would try and look at whether you can achieve that through a configuration, because I do think you probably can, but it's easier not to. It's easy just to do something a bit scary. So I don't use it anymore because everybody's bored of it, particularly my team, and actually more so me. But what I used to say when we first started out was, we're building a vanilla sponge cake. You've heard it, haven't you? We're building a vanilla sponge cake. We will not have sprinkles. Those sprinkles are just nice to have, and they're going to complicate the system. And maybe we look at it through exploitation. So we had a situation where people say, oh, we need this, Sarah. Is that a sprinkle? And then very disappointingly for them, I'd say yes. I don't use it anymore because everyone's bored of it. I just say no customizations. But yes, definitely no customization. And then the next point, which I touched on quite a bit on the previous slide, actually, was key stakeholder management. Just don't underestimate it. It is vitally important. It doesn't mean we're not stood here. I was going to say that. We're not stood here saying that everybody totally approves of everything we've done, because that's not true and it's not realistic either. But they have accepted it, And I think that's the vital point. They've accepted that we're doing it for good reason. Some special areas of the business still think they're a bit hard done by because they haven't got something, but they're not special. We're implementing the ERMF framework. So keeping those people not necessarily on side, but engaged with what we're doing and being very clear with the answers every time and not deviating or bending from that, I think has made this project, so far, we pressed the button in February, but we are 100% configured now, so I can say there's no customizations. Really, really successful.
And actually, just building on that, it's multi-layer stakeholder engagement, I would say. So I tend to speak to people in board meetings or executive level meetings in Nationwide around the metric stream and the improvement that it will drive. There are other kind of engagements with senior folks from across the firm, but also all the way down to kind of the risk practitioners and the users. It's multi-layer stakeholder engagement which we've designed here, and genuinely people are kind of on the journey with us and want us to succeed, which is tremendous.
But it's not doing it too early as well, actually. So we've been doing this for 18 or so months, a year since we signed with MetricStream. We've only just started the Business Champion Forum because we don't want people to get fatigued and bored by it by the time we implement. So it's waiting for the right time as well to engage the right stakeholders. I just thought I'd mention that because I think it's quite important.
Yeah. So implementation model, this point here is really the importance of ensuring that the team is structured in the right way through kind of first, second, third line and so on. I mean, particularly I think in terms of the core delivery team, putting it all in one place under Sarah has been really helpful, but also then kind of under me liaising in partnership with the framework team. So getting the taxonomy built in advance of implementation was really helpful. Getting taxonomy built, but probably to kind of an 80% level rather than 100% perfect level is the way to go, I would say. Because the framework and the system kind of need to flex with each other. They operate in a partnership with each other. I think it's really important that Sarah's team are really strong, the framework team are really strong. Sarah works really well with the framework leader who's based back in Swindon on the desk behind where you sit, Sarah, isn't he? And we're kind of all working in partnership with each other. And I think if any of those elements kind of aren't strong, then it would create challenges. So we've worked through having different people in the team at different times and so on. And I genuinely think that the team we've got today is as good as it's ever been. And that is leading to us really being successful, I would say, with the project.
Changing plans. Luckily, I don't think Jamie's in the room from KPMG yet, actually, which is good. So we changed plans a couple of times based on actually the last point I'm going to mention, which is dependencies. And as a result, you really do run the risk of people wondering when it's going to deliver, not actually believing in your end date, not actually believing it's going to happen. So I'd be really conscious of doing that. We did it twice, based on the regulator, actually. And based on a dependency around a controls program that's running so that we've got that data ready. And at first, we said we'd move the goalpost to whenever that controls data is ready because we want the system all singing, all dancing and working. But we've come to the point now where the plan is we go live in February, and if the controls aren't there, we go live. Because we absolutely need to make sure that we stick to that live date. So I'd be really conscious of changing plans, and we won't. We will stick to our live date of February. Clear on dependencies. This is the frustrating bit, because this is all the stuff that sits outside my team that we have no control of, but is absolutely vital. So control stuff that's happening over here to uplift all the nationwide controls and work on the optimization of those controls. You've got the change in taxonomies, the change in libraries, getting that signed off with the business. Again, absolutely vital for the tool going live. So there's a lot of stuff, and what we do is we clearly call them out on the plan. And if those programs start to go amber, we start to go amber on that basis. So just be really clear on those, because you can't blame them. If they're a clear dependency, you need to know about them. You can't turn at the end of the day and say, well, that was a dependency and it failed, so the tool failed. You're just never going to get away with that. So I think being upfront with what those dependencies are and being really clear on them will really help.
So that's the end of our kind of diatribe. Having listened to what we've just been through with you, I would say probably try and take three things from what we described. Probably business engagement, I think, is our number one thing. That is something which is a really big deal for both me and Sarah and the wider team day to day. It's a really big deal. Don't underestimate it. 2 is kind of taxonomy and getting clear on the metadata, if you like, that is going to go into the tool when it's built, being clear on the structure of that, but not trying to get the 100% version, getting it to a kind of minimum viable product almost, where it's good enough to allow you to start build, I think is really important. And the third point really is around customization. So we have, as Sarah says, through her vanilla sponge cake model that even I'm bored of hearing, I've heard it so many times, not customized, and we've held true to it, and kind of we've done some configurations, some which are more complex than others, but we've managed to configure, and that is definitely a lesson from the implementation of the previous tool, where we've customized it so far that we are just unable to upgrade it. So there are kind of main messages. Very happy to take lots of questions, lots of controversial questions, difficult questions, for Sarah in particular. The roving mic.
I thought Andrew was going to ask it.
Yeah.
Hi, Imran from Citus AMC. You've touched upon this already. I've got a couple of questions on risk taxonomy.
Yeah.
When developing your risk taxonomy, did you seek guidance from Basel or ORX, or is it your in-house or a mix of two?
Yeah, so our old risk taxonomy is a bit of a bag of spanners, actually, in many respects. It's just kind of a whole load of different things that kind of take a load of things like ORX fees or Basel, or kind of, in some cases, kind of department name have kind of ended up in our risk taxonomy. So we were determined to kind of go with something that was sensible, industry standard, and would allow us to kind of ensure completeness almost. So we've linked it very heavily to Basel. And essentially what we're trying to implement in the system is effectively the Basel taxonomy, which means in 1 or 2 cases, the kind of risks may not apply to Nationwide, but pretty much they do. And we haven't had to therefore go back and do a whole load of creation of this stuff and have lots of people sat in a room for 6 months trying to work out what the taxonomy is going to be. We have kind of just based it on Basel. We have translated it for Nationwide. So there's been a sales job. And around the margins, there'll always be a set of kind of queries, and it doesn't quite work for some areas. And sometimes we've kind of flexed a bit for them. Other times we've said, well, listen, this is an industry standard taxonomy we're going live with here, which will help us with our regulatory reporting in due course. So we've just stuck to Basel. So that's this Basel focused.
And then going forward, I assume in years ahead or 2 years, 1 year, you may be doing a refresh of your taxonomy, is the tool flexible and agile enough to accommodate a big refresh without having to do so much work with updating all your controls, your risks, etc.?
Yeah, it is. And that's a big difference between our previous system, where effectively the taxonomy was hard-coded into the system that meant you couldn't change it. Yeah. With the new system, we will be able to do that. And as you say, we'll periodically refresh the taxonomy. It's not something which we expect to refresh very often. However, the reality is we probably will need to flex it very subtly. And if Nationwide was to go into new business lines, for example, that would mean you had to do it. But also kind of that we will find that it just doesn't quite work, I expect, when we've launched a data model into live in February next year. So we'll have to just do a bit of tweaking. But the system allows you to do it. The troublemaker at the front here asking a question.
Looking at business area engagement, what would you say is the one thing that is your selling point? I guess a question for both of you. Yeah. What is your selling highlight to the business area that MetricStream introduces?
Really good question. And I would say it's single source of the truth. I think because there's so many systems at the moment that are doing all different level of stuff, and they're all trying to do the same thing ultimately, which is manage and report on risk and controls and loss events. The single source of a truth point is we have to have one single source of the truth. You have to be able to get that information out. Now, you said one thing, but the other thing, the other thing, depending on who you're talking to, is the reporting, is the dashboarding capability, is the fact that it's interactive, is the fact that in our executive risk committees and in our operational risk committees, they can look at a live dashboard and start drilling down into the risks and drilling down into the controls and seeing, as questions arise in the room, they can actually deal with them on the screen. That's been a massive selling point as well. And also, I won't lie, we are very lucky. at this stage that because the old system is so bad that everyone is really excited about the new one regardless. So that's another good selling point as well. But it depends on the business areas. So when you're talking to the IT risk director and you're talking about the fact that we can make sure that you can link, not a dynamic link, but it talks to ServiceNow in terms of what's on ServiceNow versus what's on the system. So depending on who we talk to, we'll have different selling points, I would say. But the one strap line, I would say, would be this is your single source of truth, I would say.
So mine, Aubrey, I think is kind of the linkage to organisational strategic objectives of some kind that kind of have a risk angle. So if an incident has happened of some kind, or going back 18 months or so, resilience became a really big thing in Nationwide, and we had to speak to the regulator about it quite a lot. And we could evidence through use of the data that will be reported, as Sarah just described there, from Metric Stream, that we could help the business kind of solve some of its business issues. With the old system, we couldn't do that. So it's kind of when something like that crops up, or more recently, we've had an incident internally, which has it's all been managed internally, so it's fine. But kind of we can say, well, actually, the use of Metric Stream will help to avoid those kind of things in the future. So it's kind of there's a thing that about real business value, that it will drive real business value. Any other questions?
I've got one for a change. Has anyone in this room been to the Risk Awards, the industry awards in the last month or so?
Yeah.
Oh, have you?
Oh, sorry.
There, Andrew.
Have you? Have you? Good.
Totally missed that cue.
Brilliant.
Sorry.
Has anyone on stage won the 10th annual Risk Award winning for Risk Manager of the Year?
Shucks. Yes, that was me, actually.
Was that you, Simon?
Thanks, yeah.
And also, anyone on stage won an award for Risk Team of the Year?
Well, yeah,
the whole team.
we did.
Do you want to just talk through the pinnacle of that moment? Because that journey, obviously, for Sarah has been 20 years in the making at Nationwide. That must be a fantastic recognition from industry colleagues around the work that you've done at Nationwide. Could you just talk about what that meant?
Thanks for the question. I honestly think that both of those awards really were for the work we've done probably within the whole team over a period of 3 years or so. That's involved a whole set of initiatives to kind of simplify the risk framework and eventually to go live into the Metric Stream tool once we go live in February 2020. So that's involved things like reducing the number of risk committees we've got in the organisation, rewriting all the policies, linking the policies directly to the risk taxonomy, a whole set of activities that will drive just a huge amount of additional maturity into the firm. So it's recognition of that, and each one of those individual activities is hard yards, and just take an enormous amount of time that you just can't rationalise in many respects. And really, I think we've done it without too much fanfare internally. We've kind of gone about our business, and most of the risk framework and associated kind of elements are a bit kind of unpopular. It's kind of it's almost like I always have a joke with the person who kind of designs the Nationwide car park that him and I can never do anything to satisfy people, and everyone will always moan about the fact that you can't park your car. People will always moan about the fact that the framework is kind of not quite the perfect framework they want it to be. We've done a lot of work to thin all that stuff out. The system itself is going to drive much more understanding of the performance of our risks through provision of data and reporting for the first time. So it marks the culmination of that journey, actually, which is fantastic for us as a team. It's fantastic. And the team, it's just been an enormous team effort. What would you add, Sarah?
No, I totally agree. I think the key thing was the simplicity, and they mentioned that actually when they gave the award, was simplifying it. It was so complex, it was so complicated. People were, it was so high level in some respects, but then so detailed in others. The simplification, I think, of that framework, which in turn has helped us choose the tool, enable the tool, configure the tool based on that simplified framework, I think is one of the key reasons. We won, was the ability to simplify the framework across committees, across taxonomies, across policies. We took the policies right down. We have far too many. So I think that's what I'd add. But I think the simplification element of it was absolutely key.
It's a multi-year journey as well, and everyone in Nationwide kind of always wants you to go faster and do some stuff, and they always get a bit bored by the fact when you say, actually, this could take a year or two to deliver, and they just want you to have done it last week, sort of thing. So it's in recognition, I think, of holding firm on that.
Yeah.
And 3 years ago, we wrote a plan for what we were going to do over the 3 years are about to finish, and we've absolutely hit the milestones we said we were going to hit over those 3 years.
Is there any final question? Sarah, Simon, I'd like to thank you for your time today and just for sharing your journey, your story, your ups and downs, and hopefully we can take some of your lessons learned back to our organizations. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Thank you.